Hello, everyone, and welcome to Embracing Radical Change. I am your host, Jocelyn Mercado, and in this event, you are invited to join with us in global conversations with 27 cutting-edge experts and thought leaders who will guide you to connect with the truth in your heart, to unlearn the illusions of our modern world, and to activate bold new perspectives about the future of humanity. And today I am truly, truly honored to welcome Pat McCabe, Woman Stand Shining. Welcome, Pat. Thank you so much for being a part of this event.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I'm really honored and very excited to be asked to be a part of this event.
So glad to have you here. So with everybody who is joining now, please do go on over to the chat and put your name and location in so we can see where everybody's calling in from around the world. Always love to see. And you can find the chat button on the bottom of your screen. There should be a little chat button right there. You can click and type in your name and location. So let me just read your bio, Pat, and let people know about your work in case they don't know about it already. So Pat McCabe, known as Woman Stand Shining, is a Diné or Navajo, a mother, grandmother, activist, artist, writer, ceremonial leader, and international speaker. She is a voice for global peace, and her paintings are created as tools for individual, earth, and global healing. She has appeared in 2 documentary films, Seeding Change and Journeying to Turtle Island, and has presented at numerous conferences, events, and Indigenous gatherings all around the world. She lives in Taos, New Mexico, and hopes all peoples of the earth can learn from Indigenous experience and remember themselves and their own birthright relationship with this Mother Earth. She draws upon the deep Indigenous sciences of thriving life to reframe inquiries about sustainability and balance. And she is devoted to supporting the next generations, the women's nation and the men's nation, in becoming functional members of the Hoop of Life and upholding the honor of being human. So, Pat, to start out our conversation, could you share about the Hoop of Life? And I know I've heard you speak before about our natural design for thriving life and why we need to remember and return to these.
Yes, well, one of my favorite subjects, so thought you'd never ask. So first of all, I want to say good morning or good afternoon to everybody, and want to say that I'm from the Diné people. So I'll introduce myself. And so I say Yat Bene, good morning from where I am. And also to let you know that I was adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life. And in that way, I was given the name Weyakba Najiwi. And great honor to be given that name. And it translates roughly in English to Woman Stand Shining. So yeah, just greet you from that place. And so I wanted to speak a little bit about where that sacred hoop of life, I think many cultures all over the world acknowledge something similar to that, but where I received my teaching about it was through the Lakota tradition. And so, you know, the way that I hold it and see it, and from what was explained to me, is that, you know, every member of life gets to have a sacred place on that hoop. And so it's a huge honor. It's a really huge honor to be given that place here on this Mother Earth with all of these magnificent children. You can't quite see it out my window because it's a little too bright out there, but there's, you know, the leaves are all turning yellow, and I'm just really admiring this standing nation, the trees all around me, the clouds. The rain came recently. We haven't had much rain, so that was really a blessing. So, you know, to be included in that community of life is just really extraordinary to me. And so, you know, what I understand about it, what was shown to me actually in a vision out at Canyon de Chelly, when I was really struggling, and this was new for me, about what took place in my people's history. I got to have a pretty good or maybe terrible dose through vision through repeated vision of what it was like when the soldiers first rode down on us. And even though I had been raised in international community and raised to really deeply value multicultural settings and to really appreciate and honor other people's cultures, their customs, their dance, their food from a very young age, I went through this period of feeling like serious, deep rage for the first time in my life. And it was so scary to me because I had so been taught, that all the races were equal, they all deserved honor, respect, and all of a sudden I was just in this place that I had never experienced before. And so while I was in that place and searching and praying, I went out to Canyon de Chelly for a retreat, I guess you could say. And anyway, there over the canyon, I saw this hoop hovering. And actually there were literally two eagles came. One eagle came and circled, like following that hoop, and then screamed out to another to come. And so these two eagles were flying in a circle all on the perimeter of that hoop that I was seeing over the canyon. And during that time, what I saw was that there were certain parts of the hoop that are crumbling and beginning to fail. Different cultures, different species, different ecosystems. And there were some that were really strong and intact. And then there were some pieces that were missing altogether. And that's when I had this really deep insight that, if there's any rage to be had, it's for all of us to have. If there's any sorrow to be had, it's for all of us to have. And so, I think that was when I first really, really sank in deep on a very visceral level, somatic level, that, we're all one. And so this is what led me to say that, if any member of the hoop of life doesn't uphold their part, then the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And so, what I began to realize thinking about that was that, humanity is not really upholding our part of the sacred hoop of life right now. And it is infecting the integrity of the entire hoop. And so one other thing that I noticed in seeing that vision was that I've come to really feel and understand that the sacred hoop of life doesn't understand us and them. There's no us and them on that sacred hoop. There's different vantages depending on where you are on the hoop or what your embodiment is here, but there's no us and them. There's only we. It's a we construct. And every time we try to depart from that and create or fall for the deception of separation, life begins to suffer. And so that's what also leads me to say in many of my talks that, and you read it in my bio, that, I want to uphold the honor of being human being on that sacred hoop. And that's a really helpful focus at this time. I've been saying that, as a species right now, we're having a little self-esteem crisis, because I think we have this sense right now, or a lot of people I talk to, that everything we touch, we hurt. But, for me, in going into prayer in community, I get to witness the beauty of us, the inherent sacredness, the way we can drop into our sacred language and our sacred thinking, our sacred understanding. And so I know that we still are imbued completely with honor. I think one thing that you just brought up, which is maybe where we want to go, is, so this has led me to ask, so if here's all these other members on the sacred hoop of life, and they are, doing their work and upholding their part, perfectly, as Barry Lopez says, the impeccable way in which they conduct their lives. And so I have to believe that humanity also has inherently a perfect design for thriving life. Like, to be a member of that hoop, I think it implies, or it affirms that, yes, you also have a perfect design for thriving life. But the question is, are we living it? Are we aware of it? And how do we come to that awareness? So maybe that's a good start for us around the sacred hoop of life.
Yes. Thank you so much. Well, I think those are great questions to move forward with if you feel called to. do so. And how, if we've become disconnected from our sacred purpose as human beings, how can we remember that and reconnect with it?
So I think you may have to remind me about that, because there's something I did want to say in this context of how you have set this up, and I absolutely agree. I mean, I'm someone who's been going around talking about, what we really need are radical propositions right now, and we need radical departures from the way we've been thinking and the way we've been acting and the way we've been feeling, because clearly it's not leading to thriving life, not for us, but for the rest of the sacred hoop of life. But I do want to address this theme of radical, because I have some concern about it sometimes, and I think we're gonna come, bump into this concern, this place of caution, a lot right now, because as we begin to abandon, we're being forced to abandon what we think we know, then it sort of opens up this door to, it has to open up this door to new possibilities. But I'm going to say that, for me, I think we'd be in trouble if we just let it be like this free for all, because in a way, if we look at humanity right now, humanity is just going with whatever they can think up to do. We do it, no questions. You just go for it, and it has to do with this idea of the novelty of our own intellect, and what novel things it can come up with, and then we just do it, and we're kind of taught that. Well, we're definitely taught that in Western education system, because the new idea is so prized, right? I mean, you literally get prizes for it sometime. Science fair, creative writing, artwork, it's like the new and the different is what is valued and rewarded.
Yeah.
So what I want to propose as we explore, this idea of radical change, radical transformation, that is, I think, definitely being called for, is, does that mean there's no structure? Does that mean that, we're going to continue on with anything goes? And so I think what might be a radical departure for a lot of modern world is to consider what kind of structure should we be having in order to make this radical shift. And so, one thing I've been saying is, about this idea of truth, because I use that word truth, capital T, a lot when I'm writing and et cetera. And so, what comes up in modern world a lot of times is like, well, truth is relative. And actually, I was just talking to a dear journalist friend of mine yesterday, and she's like, oh boy, is truth being challenged and being made relative, like facts are relative now and all these things, right? And so so it's a big thing, but what I would say about it is this, and maybe people have heard me say this who've listened to some other things, but I think it bears mentioning here in this context, which is that so if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're having like different points of view, and someone says, well, that's my truth, they're drawing a line in the sand, and they're saying, okay, I'm letting you know that you're getting close to bumping into a boundary I'm setting here with you, and if you decide to come over that boundary, things could get pretty difficult or intense or both, or our relationship might be in jeopardy. That's sort of a warning signal, right? And so I've been thinking about that, and I've been thinking, so does everybody get to have their truth? Is that how this works? And I'm going to say, I was always taught that, yes, everybody gets to have their truth. But at this point in my life, I'm going to go out on the limb and say, no, I don't think everybody gets to have their truth. And I'll frame it like this, so just so we can be clear. So it's like, yeah, you can have your truth any way you want it. You can do whatever you want to do here, because we are in what I'm going to call a free will construct. And so clearly that's what's been happening. But what I'm going to propose is you might not be able to have every truth that you can dream up. You might not be able to do everything you can dream up and still have thriving life on this Mother Earth. So that, I think, is our big question right now. Do we still want to have thriving life on the Mother Earth? Or do we want to just keep going merrily along, doing everything this up here can dream up? Unrestricted, unrestrained, no boundaries. And so to me, that brings us back to Indigenous cultures, because Indigenous cultures also have been operating under the law of free will for all these thousands of years that they have been in place, and have been recently under assault and disrupted. But and yet their way of approaching being a member of this sacred hoop of life is very different than modern world. So to me, that's a reason why I think we do want to look at Indigenous cultures and what are those principles that have held that sustainability, that deep sustainability for thousands of years, right? And so for me, as I look at it, sometimes even within Indigenous culture, I feel like some of our constructs that have maybe they've always been that way, or maybe they are a result of colonization, but I'm feeling like I'm having to have some departure from some of those, because I don't feel like they are in alignment with thriving life. So I think everybody's in this soup. I don't think anybody has like the whole picture that they just, is all laid out in the blueprint for them. So we're being called to consider the structures for boundaries and protocols that exist. And I think we're also being called to perhaps expand or create new ones. And that's really tender territory for everybody.
Yeah, I think this is such an important piece of the conversation that you're bringing up here. And it's very interesting because we got into this just a little bit in one of the earlier conversations this week, where it was in the Q&A, and one of the audience members was saying, well, should I get to do whatever I want if maybe I think I'm Buddha, and I think that I should be telling everybody else what to do because I'm Buddha, then does that mean my truth is correct if I believe that, right? So we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but as an example, whatever our mind can dream up, do we just go with it? And I love where you're leading into here, because this was a question I wanted to ask you, which is, how can the world look to Indigenous cultures now for help and guidance in our environmental crisis, and different types of crises that we're facing? And of course, it's not to say that anybody is perfect, right? Or has greater knowledge than others, but looking to those cultures who have lived in sustainable ways with the earth, in reciprocal connection with Mother Earth for thousands and thousands of years. Is this where we need to be looking to set up structures and boundaries, perhaps, going forward? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's tricky terrain, as we know, for those of us who are cross-culturally engaging. So I think, for me, I was around elders who were very clear that humanity and even tribal designation wasn't necessarily based on blood. It was based on mindset and action and enactment of spiritual principle. And so, like my clan grandfather called us the five-fingered ones, and calls our long name for our people is Holy Earth Surface Walkers, Life Bringers, Life Bearers. And well, that's for me as a woman, I should say our name for our people is Holy Earth Surface Walkers. So it's a designation as how we see ourselves, but really it's also a designation for humanity. So I was raised when I came into bumped into Indigenous worldview after being deep in colonization for the first 28 years, 29 years of my life. And so those were the elders who were around me. And so for me right now, honestly, it's a little baffling to be, and I will say that I've noticed a big shift post Standing Rock. For those of you who are aware of what took place in South Dakota as the Standing Rock Sioux Nation stood up against the Dakota Access Pipeline, and then eventually called world community, Indigenous peoples from all over the world, and everybody from all over the world receiving endorsements from the city of Los Angeles and all these factions that we've never heard from before, who would literally say, "I stand with Indigenous people." So it was a really momentous time. So beautiful gifts came out of that. And I know within my own family, I've witnessed that there's also a sort of resurgence of a kind of, on one hand, we might call it militant, what I would call militant Indigenous outlook for protecting of rights and culture. And at the same time, there was so much bridging that took place. So I feel like, this duality kind of emerged from that incredible event for humanity that took place there. And so what I feel like I'm encountering right now, especially from young people, is kind of a resurgence of deep protectiveness. And so this idea of cultural appropriation has gotten pretty fierce, really, really fierce. And I am praying a lot about how to be in that and how to work with that, because it is not my inclination at all to close that avenue off. So one, I just feel like I want to lay that groundwork a little bit, and there's good reason for why people feel that way, and some of it has to do, of course, with a huge amount of hurt for what Indigenous peoples how we've been treated with attempted genocide. I mean, attempted genocide, like this world wanted to exterminate all of us to make way for more, whatever, And so, yeah, there's some freaking hard feelings around that. So I really, hope that people can understand, how that happens. But there's also other reasons that people might not be aware of. And those reasons are, and I'm experiencing it a lot because I'm right there working with, I put myself in places where I'm working with, or I should say spirit puts me there. I don't know if I would, but spirit puts me in these places where I'm really working deeply with, quote, non-Indigenous, not currently tribal Indigenous peoples. And sometimes where they go with what I bring and what I offer is just mind-boggling to me. Like, like it's frightening sometimes, where I'm like, oh my gosh, did I set that in motion? Did I make that seem like that was what needed to happen? And what I'm realizing is that it's worldview crashing into worldview. And so even though we're using this English tongue, we're not talking about the same things a lot. And so I'm going to say this is where sort of my radicalness is coming in, maybe in this interview, is to say that I've been super fearful about that line. Like even as I sit here saying that, I just want to cry, because it's so frightening to me to think about violating any other Indigenous people, my own people, the beautiful Lakota people who gifted me my life. I mean, by participating in that spiritual way, it saved my life. And so I have I've been moving with a lot of trepidation and fear about my place in it. I mean, there's no question about what my place is in it. I am here to help provide an avenue for Indigenous perspective to other people outside who have not been raised with that. And so just in the last 2 weeks, I have had a shift in which I'm realizing, it's never a place of strength to be moving out of fear and a feeling of being inhibited. And so I think in the last 2 weeks, what has come up for me is this idea that, one, I have to ask myself, am I on the right road or am I not on the right road? By trying to trying to bring indigenous ethics and principles of deep sustainability to the rest of the world? And my answer to that question is no. I'm not on the wrong path. I am absolutely on the right path. It is the path that Spirit asks of me. And so if I can accept that, then what I would like to do is to step out of this fear and create every debacle, of which there are many, as a transparent, and be transparent about the opportunity for us to learn about how these two things can come together. And so I just yesterday even, I was just saying to myself, I don't have to be ashamed when these difficulties arise. I don't have to feel like I've betrayed something because a difficulty arises, because worldviews are coming together trying to understand. And part of the reason that I went through that was lately I've been being put together with groups that are really big in some kind of business endeavors, basically young millionaires, and people who are, because I talk about the power over paradigm a lot, and I say, so all the fruits of the labor are moving up, and eventually they end up at the top part like this, right, which is a big part of world discussion. So normally I'm working with people who are like down in this bottom area, which is pretty rough stuff, very rough stuff. I mean, this system is brutal. But lately I've been asked to work with people who are like up in the middle, right? So they're not suffering necessarily, in some ways you could say, by being a part of that system. And that's really new territory for me. And it really pushes my buttons. And what I've learned this last week was that, once again, I have to ask myself, am I committed to where Spirit sends me? So you're asking, how do we do this? I'm going to say, if you go out every morning and offer tobacco, face the sun as it's coming up, and ask for that larger community, meaning all the rest of the life around us, the rest of the sacred hoop of life in this material world. And for me, I also include the spiritual help that I believe that I was sent here with, and that I believe that every one of us was sent here with, that is for life, light, and love, important to say. And I invite that in, then I kind of have to trust where it's all going to go. And so, when Spirit says, yes, I want you to sit down and have a talk with all these young millionaires, we're like this a lot. And at the same time, I realize that no one has ever said any of what I'm saying to them. They've never heard it before. And what I'm really being pleasantly surprised at, as well as getting appalled from time to time, is how willing and really how open and really how much of a skill set many of these people have, who to bridge this worldview, to bridge all the social aspect that it takes to really bridge two radical worldviews that are so different, radically different worldviews. And I'm just stunned over and over again by the skill set that people have that I have not given them credit for. And so what I'm saying to myself today about it is, I feel like I'm really more open to all different kinds of people and worldviews than many people I meet. And yet I still have my hard spots, and Spirit's kind of helping me break down some of those now. But what I'm noticing about it is that I can have Pat McCabe as the person, can have lots of opinions running as I'm sitting there. And as long as I'm willing to surrender to Spirit and to the medicine and to the laws of the medicine, which say, I don't get to interfere in how someone else is praying or what they're asking for. Even though I'm a little scared for them, because I feel like, wow, you're in a powerful place and you're praying for some pretty outrageous stuff. And I know for myself from experience, you're gonna get answered, and it's gonna be a lot for you because you don't necessarily understand where you are. You're not used to being met when you say those things. but you're going to get met. And so I have to just I have to sit with that and kind of let it ride. But what I'm noticing, I guess what I want to say is, I have a skill right now where I can get out of the way. I can let spirit do what spirit wants to do in these places. I can let the medicine guide, and the medicine has a way of unifying. So I see this infinity symbol, like so, and that's the weaving of spirit between what has appeared to be duality. And so it's the unification of duality can come about based upon this ancient medicine. And I have to believe that this ancient medicine comes out of the construct of this earth. Of course it does. So by invoking that, and before we had this conversation today, I went out and laid tobacco down and said, let this conversation inform. Let me be the conduit, spirit, for whatever you would have me say, and let this conversation serve the very highest possibility for life, light, and love. And so when I make that invocation, when I dedicate my part in this, and also your coming, that's being met. And so I guess in there, hopefully I'm giving some clues about some how-tos. But every time people ask me where to start, I always say, as you know, Jocelyn, the place to start is to go out in the morning and make that offering the way human beings have done all over the planet throughout time. Like that's tried and true. And call in that which serves life, light, and love that can inform you, and watch what happens. I mean, I challenge you to do that. Make a commitment to do that every day for, I don't know, even a month, and just watch what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Pat. Thank you. So what's coming up for me upon hearing you and thinking about, the new groups of people you're speaking with, and that, that they're coming from a different place in the paradigm, right? Is it all about our intentions then? Do you believe that we can work through these things, these cultural differences, these societal differences, and belief system differences, if we come together with clear intentions that are aligned?
Well, I'm going to start by saying something that I say in a general way about that. So people who sometimes observe Indigenous practice and then go out on their own and attempt to replicate it without the guidance of the community, without the guidance of the elders and all. I hear a lot of them say, well, really it all comes down to intention. And I would say, in a general way, yes. I mean, obviously, without intention, nothing can be intended, and therefore nothing can be created. So yeah, we have to have the intention. That's where things begin. And this is something that I feel like I'm being really called out on, is, by my spirit helpers, is, you got to just keep remembering. I mean, you've been saying it, but now you have to remember it yourself, that everything begins, before it ever comes into the physical world, begins on the energetic level. So, right. So intention, absolutely important. Good intention, intending to connect with light, intending to connect with love, intending to connect with life and life principles. Absolutely. And so then I say, for people who don't have that lineage, who don't have that way of interacting with the tried and true knowledge of ancient culture on a regular basis, does that mean you should not be doing anything? I would say absolutely not. I think we all have to be reaching at this time for the way in which we are indigenous to this Mother Earth. I think that is one of our biggest questions right now, is how are you indigenous to Mother Earth? So indigenous meaning, to be of place. So I'm Dene, and so I am of the place where this turquoise comes from, for instance. And so this has become we know that this gift from the earth, from where we live, blesses us and takes care of us. We've developed a conversation with it, a relationship with it, a love affair with it, and can call upon it as elder. And so, it's right for me to have this and wear this. I just, side note, Tiffany and company is now buying up turquoise mines all over. So this is getting very hard to find. But just to say that, this is right for me. So there is that specificity of being Indigenous, but in a general way, I think we're absolutely all being called to claim being Indigenous to this earth, and what does that look like? So so what I say about intention then is that, yes, even if you don't have that lineage, to be out making that offering, to begin to turn your ear to what is the response to that offering, to witness the synchronicities and begin to weave the story together for yourself. We might call that a form of bushwhacking in a way. So I say, there are lots of paths that lead to the top of the mountain. And some of them are tried and true. And some of those, maybe we could say, Indigenous cultures hold, or other cultures, ancient cultures hold. But there's still a way to get up there. The difficulty with not having that path laid out for you is you're going to hit pitfalls that you weren't expecting. And you may have to backtrack and go around. Oops, there's a big cliff and a ravine. There's no way for me to get around, and I got to backtrack and go around. So, but nevertheless, I feel like that intention, that's all a part of upholding the honor of being human being and making that journey, having the willingness to make that journey. So intention is really important. And then what I like to say is, so when we get our intention lined up with ancient technology and those two things come together, wow, then we are in the place of our ancestors. Now that's not an easy thing to line up for any group of human beings. But occasionally we pull all that together, and then we really have something going. So for us to have all of the ancient knowledge and technology, but to have our intention be one still of separation, I don't think that's fully unlocking and accessing the medicine that was given to Indigenous people. So see, we have work to do on our side as well. But it's when we put all that together, and that's what I think we're aiming for. And that's what I'm really interested in facilitating and furthering and bringing about, is our ability to do that together. One other thing I want to say about intention is, so working with this new part of the paradigm, I have this question, and I'm not sure I can answer it here because it's a very new question for me. But I've been saying to myself, because for me, capitalism is a problem. and it's what dominates our understanding of how we get food, clothing, and shelter. So it's become a very primal piece of business for us. And so capitalism is a difficult thing, in my view, because to me, the very structure of it, it's inherent. There's an inherent competitiveness. And that means there's an inherent belief in scarcity. There's only so much to go around, and I want to make sure I have enough, but then enough keeps moving. That line of enough just keeps moving out there, right? So eventually it's like, I need to have a lot. It's not just enough. And so I feel like that's inherent in the system. And so what that often means is that if somebody is winning in that system, somebody else has to lose. That's also inherent in that system, and that's part of its violence. And one thing I really wanted to be sure to say today is, as a radical statement maybe, is that paradigm is a choice. Paradigm is a choice. The holy people have said to me, do you people know, meaning the five-fingered ones, do you people know you can have it any way you want it? You can have it any way you want it. And right now you're saying you want it like this, but you can have it any way you want it, right? And so we've taken on this paradigm, and I think we've forgotten that paradigm is a choice. So I really want to propose that to us today. Paradigm is a choice. Try it on, see how that feels. So in this paradigm of capitalism, we accept, and this also brings me to another thing I'm exploring, which is consent, but maybe we can talk that in a minute. But we accept this paradigm and we go at it because we don't feel like we have a choice, and it's hard to have food, clothing, and shelter in there. I think I just read something today that said for those working minimum wage, you have to have 2.5 full-time jobs in order to have a one-bedroom apartment right now. That's capitalism. Okay, so so then, to share medicine and to bring medicine to these young capitalists who are doing pretty well in it, that was a big question for me. I was like, is it really serving what I want to serve to, bring this in this arena? So I was full of a lot of suspicion and fear. And so that question is still lingering. But ultimately, what I saw in that is when I got out of the way, which I managed to do, and let the medicine do what the medicine does and bring us into we, then I could begin to see that a lot of the terms that they're using are very triggering for me because it's economy speak. But when we really begin to break them down, we can find a lot of commonalities. And then I have a place to bring in input from Indigenous worldview into these places. Once we start to break it down, once we begin to say, I just want to use my gifts to help the world and to have what I need. I think that's a very basic human thing. And so I guess what I get to do now in that place of capitalism is to insert possibilities for restructuring that paradigm. So I don't have to throw out all of mine. They don't have to throw out all of theirs. And so that's just barely beginning right now. But it's really exciting to me because it's showing me the medicine works. The medicine works in every situation. And this we medicine is so alive and thriving that we unless we're just bent on stopping it, it will find its way to us if we can allow it.
That's very powerful. Very, very powerful. And this idea of restructuring that paradigm. So yes, now I know you mentioned consent. Would you like to speak more about that? Is that a good next place to go?
I think it is. So I'm kind of talking about the stuff that I'm working with presently. So it's not all neat and tidy and landing with bullet points of what to next steps. So just hopefully you can enjoy, these explorations in this part of this road that I'm traveling right now. But, so obviously with Kavanaugh being vetted, with Dr. Ford coming forward, wow, huh? But even before that, with the whole Me Too arising, consent has come up, consent. And I will say that I am shocked at how many women, but really everybody, feels that they have been violated without consent, through sexual assault. That's just blowing my mind. And that's a deep one for anybody. So that's another whole layer of trauma. I say at this point we're a traumatized species, and just to really get a feel for how deep that particular trauma is, not to mention the genocides and economic trauma. I mean, it's just it's rampant. And so, but I want to stick to this one. And so, it really brought up consent. And so the first thing that came up for me around it, watching that display, well, it was a really important thing. And I just so give deep respect, gratitude, and prayer on behalf of Dr. Ford for being the one to put that on the world stage. I mean, it was a theater, and it was one that we really needed to see to really understand how ingrained this is. And so where it brought me, though, was also saying, so if a woman, for instance, or we'll start in this case with women, if a woman is held out of this economic system, so some of you may have heard me say that I see that system as being a power over paradigm. And in a power over paradigm, might makes right. And it means somebody has to overpower somebody else in order for them to have what they need. And so I say in that system, men are going to dominate that because it's been a while, but it came down to whoever was physically strongest would dominate this scene. And so even though it looks like everybody's in shiny shoes and ties and suit coats or whatever in this scenario, or maybe they're having casual Fridays, but nevertheless, they are, looking very civilized, that violence is just a hair's breadth below the surface in terms of, if I can beat you out, I will. If I can cutthroat you, I will. If I can trick you into making sure I get the promotion, I will. So all that violence is still rampant in that system. It's right there. So women have been kept out of that system. And there actually is a hopeful part of that, but we'll talk about that maybe later. But anyway, so if women are, their means of having food, clothing, and shelter is out of their control, if justice is not available to them for what they experience, just in every way, their health needs are regulated, their ability to conceive or not conceive, or to birth or not birth is being controlled somewhere else. So all of these avenues for the women, which I think has really come up, is being controlled down to, also how she looks, how she ages. So, we've been saying the elder woman just gets thrown out. Women bearing children get to be with their husband up to, I think we should almost see this as being like it'd be easier on us to say this is how marriage works rather than to try to say it works any other way. Women get to bear the children, raise them up to a certain point, usually somewhere around adolescence, and then the man takes off and finds a younger woman, and there's that woman on her own trying to navigate this system that she is held out of and that she doesn't have any say in. And that's norm in at least first world nations, in the United States, right? And so in that instance, how can a woman actually give her consent? Like her true freedom, free consent. Because she has to play ball or she can't feed her kids. She has to play ball or she can't, have transportation. It just became really clear to me what a deep setup that is. That on some level, that's playing around this whole idea of consent. And so from there, of course, we can say that about other groups of people. What about Indigenous people? How do they really give their consent? And then we can say, well, what about, trans people or, all these different groups of people that are kept out of that system? How are they ever to truly give consent here? And then I began to think, because as I work with men's groups, I'm thinking, there are a lot of men who are also not allowed to travel up that ladder. So at first it used to just be women or African Americans or Native people or brown people. But now even white males are starting to realize, hey, this system is rigged and I'm getting chewed up in here, So, pretty soon we're starting to recognize it's really only these guys up here that really get anything out of this paradigm that we're participating in. And so then it comes down to how is anybody really giving consent in this paradigm? And so, so here's part of the radicalness. I try to avoid this topic, but, and this is about thinking about the trickster. So Trickster is a character in almost every Indigenous culture I have ever encountered. And it's framed in different ways, but lately I've been looking at it. So I've been trying on this view. I don't say that this is my complete, absolute rock truth, but I'm trying it on and seeing, how does Trickster play out in all this? And so one of the scenarios that I entertain and look through is to say, so if Trickster, what's Trickster's ultimate goal here? And I'm going to say that we could argue that Trickster's ultimate goal is to trick us out of this life. So picture the bet with God scenario, the devil and God having this bet. And Trickster is saying to God, I bet that I could trick these human beings into giving away this life if I wanted to. And here's God saying, no way. Look where I put them. I put them in paradise. They have fruit everywhere. They have water everywhere. They have beauty everywhere. They have, all these amazing animal relatives and insects. And, it's just, there's no way these guys would ever give that up. And Trickster says, oh, but I'm pretty sure I could do it. So the bet is on, right? And so I say, how does Trickster get human beings to forget about life when it's just blasting everywhere around us? And I say, well, I guess you'd have to do it one little deception at a time over a long period of time until we wake up today, 2018, with, our kids not realizing that water doesn't actually just come out of a faucet, and food doesn't come from the grocery store. It actually comes out of the dirt. So we've gotten to this place, and we build whole constructs that have almost no other life in it except for us and what comes out of our mind. So these giant urban centers where we're not even interested in the rest of the community. We're like, just us, And so I'm going to say that campaign, if that were the case, would be very dang successful right about now. And we find ourselves in this place where we, of our own free will, with a lot of help of deception and illusion, are ready to hand this life over. We can see it. We can, the scientists can come out and say, here's what you need to do. And so far, I'm not seeing really huge movement to do it. It's kind of still more in alarm phase. So with that, I'm looking at our consent, and I'm thinking, could it be as simple as saying, this earth life cannot be taken from us. This Mother Earth cannot be destroyed if we do not give our consent. So this is sort of a radical idea that I've been working with. But what it takes then is understanding all the millions of ways, seemingly unrelated even, in which we give consent to this life being taken away from us. So more to come on, kind of mapping that out. What kinds of consent are we giving? What does it look like? That's what I want to start working on next, because I got this feeling that in this construct, which we say is governed by the law of free will, that if we of our own free will do not consent to this life being taken from us, I don't think it can be. What about that?
Yeah, very powerful. And yes, my mind is kind of spinning right now with, wow, all the ways that I am giving consent or that I am resisting, giving consent, right? Yes. So, well, I look forward to hearing more about that.
Me too.
Right. Yeah. One other thing I would love to ask you before we go to Q&A and all of that. You mentioned that there's a bright side to the people who have been left out of the power over paradigm. I think that was how I understood it anyway. Would you mind saying a few words about that?
Yes. So it's pretty straightforward. It's saying, so if you've been kept out of that paradigm, as many women I know have, but other people as well, and maybe even people who have the wisdom, courage, and strength who could be very successful in that paradigm, but see it for what it is and say, no, I won't go. They do not give their consent. What that then means is that we have had to create pathways, networks, methods for working outside of that system. And so I think that those beginnings, granted, it's mostly all in reaction to something as opposed to being proactive. But nevertheless, I feel like those can be some of our starting places for choosing a new paradigm for what has to arise next, because there is the beginning of structures that are outside of this paradigm. And so even though, I think once maybe I get over my resentment or fear or sorrow for not being able to play the game, now I'm feeling pretty good about the fact that I have done a lot of work that allows me to move freely and not have to be beholden or imprisoned by that system. And so I'm starting to really rejoice in that for sure. There's one other thing that I did want to address that sort of goes with consent. Sure. And that is loyalty. This has come up for me right now. And this feels super radical to me, but I feel like Spirit has been asking me to really look, and then Spirit's been helping me with throwing very difficult situations up for me, of asking me, what are you loyal to? What are you loyal to, and why? Like, I'm really having to examine that. So we have narratives, very powerful narratives in humanity about loyalty. And I'm starting to get this idea, based on what's happening in my world, that we may have to give up some of those loyalties, maybe temporarily in our own lifetime, or maybe temporarily meaning I will in my generation, but my granddaughter won't have to. But right now, because we are a traumatized species and this trauma is playing out in a million different ways, we, those of us who are really rolling up our sleeves and getting down and working on freeing ourselves, unlocking us out of that prison of trauma, and God bless the trauma workers, thank you, and there's lots of webinars and stuff coming up around dealing with trauma, and that's, I just feel like that's got to be a basic human toolkit right now, because when you're governed by trauma, you know, your solutions are almost non-existent. You're pretty well locked into a system. So to break out of that trauma is so important. And so part of that might be, you got to let go of family members. You got to let go of tribal members. You've got to let go of whatever gender partners, you know, friends that you hang out with. You might have to let go of that. Like, in other words, you can't just be in there only because the narrative says, well, you have to be there. The narrative right now, to me, is what do I need to do to continue moving forward, to release the illusions and delusions that led me away from life. And so if I'm hanging out with people who are still clinging to that, whether they're blood family, whether they're tribal member, whether they're, you know, whatever those loyalty stories have been, that's going to make it difficult. But not only does it make it difficult, what I'm noticing as I'm shedding certain things that are very damn taboo to shed, by the way, Spirit. I mean, it's scary. It's vulnerable. The vulnerability is almost overwhelming to shed some of these things that I'm supposed to be loyal to, especially in Native narrative. It's powerful. But when I'm willing to shed them and step into whatever I am without them, all new vistas that must have been there this whole time. They had to have been there this whole time, but all of a sudden they open up. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I feel like because I've shed some of my loyalty story and the people that go along with it, that is actually what's allowing me to have an openness to work with these young millionaires and young capitalists that are just jamming out and stuff. Like, I honestly don't think that I could have done that if I had held on to those things. So now it's expanding my ability to participate in the construct, the underlying basis of our construct, which is we. So I do feel like that's an important piece to bring up right now that I'm also working with.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. So I think time-wise, we should go to the Q&A soon. Sorry, my dog is starting to bark there. Ruby, no, don't bark now. I put her upstairs sometimes because she's a little tiny thing, but she wants to be a guard dog, so she likes to bark. Come here. So anyway, but is there anything else, Pat, that you wanted to say before we go into the Q&A, or that feels really important before we do that?
Yes, I don't ever write notes, but I did for some reason, so I might as well hit on these things really brief. So going back to this radical idea, I didn't just get up one day and say, gosh darn it, it's time for me to be radical. You know, actually what happened to me was the spirits came to me and they said, your understanding of cause and effect is rudimentary. And they're scolding me. They're like so impatient. They're like, geez, Louise, oh, come on already, you know, and which they're not always that way. So I really pay attention when they get that way. And so I was like, your understanding of cause and effect is rudimentary. And so I said, you know, I could feel it. And I was like, okay, yes, I agree. So then please help me understand how I as human being can participate in another kind of cause and effect. So if any of you out there want to join that and send out some prayers, you can ask from that which serves life, light, and love, what other kind of cause and effect can I participate in? So this kind of goes back to Einstein's thing of saying, you know, you cannot solve a problem from the same level that it was created, right? So they're the ones proposing new cause and effect to me that feels really dang radical. So it's not just about me being a human being, seeing what kind of radicalness I can bring up. Like, I am willing to now say, I am willing to give up this paradigm. And I'm also willing to give up my understanding of cause and effect. And I invite your input. What would you say? So for me, it's coming from a very ordered, knowledgeable, wise place. That's where my radicalness is coming from. And so I just keep feeling the need that that's important to say. The other thing that I'd like to just quickly say is that a prayer that I'm really working with as well right now, and it seems to be really changing things for me and opening things, is when I start going into my trauma zone or lots of different places, but I definitely notice, because I've just realized in the last 2 years that I've suffered from PTSD. I didn't even know it. So I'm starting to recognize when that fog comes on, when that sort of looseness of can't quite, anyway, I start to notice the symptoms of when it's coming on. And so when I start feeling that come on, what I say, because it's like hopping on a railroad track all of a sudden, and there's no turning, there's no veering, it's just gonna go. And it always ends up in the same place. I don't like where it ends up. So I'm trying to figure out what to do. So what I do now, and I'm starting to do it in other circumstances, but that's where it came from, is I say this prayer and I say, Spirit, here I am, here I go again. What else can I be thinking other than what I always think? Show me the spectrum of possibilities for what I could be thinking. What else could I be feeling other than what I always feel? Show me the spectrum of possibilities for what I could feel. I mean, who knew that you could choose what you feel, right? But you can. And so we get locked into emotional patterns. But so this is my way of saying, I invite you in to disrupt this emotional pattern because it's not going where I want it to go. So what else could I be feeling? And then from there, it leads to, so then what else could I be doing other than what I always do in this situation? So when I'm with a bunch of successful capitalists, what do I always think? What do I always feel? So I invite that interruption in and I say, show me. And that has been pretty freaking extraordinary lately in so many different scenarios.
Yes, that's extremely powerful and very useful, I think, for those listening to really, because we've been so conditioned and so patterned to see things in only a certain pretty narrow way. So to allow in the more that is possible. And a couple of people have kind of quoted you in the chat. So I think everybody's really feeling the power of that. Show me the spectrum of possibility. 2 different people have written that. Yeah. Thank you. Anything else that feels important? I don't want to miss anything. It all feels so important.
Thank you. You're so generous. There was something I was going to say about the cause and effect. What was it? It was, well, I will say this, because, we've just had this really sobering, and I think I was putting it lightly, sobering report from the scientific community has just come out recently, and I wish I could remember the name of it. I can't. But, to me, it feels like it's fairly neutral. It's not really put out by a specific group. It's not put out by a political entity. It's not. So, it feels like it's human community coming together and saying, this is what we know about our situation. And so in that scenario, it's talking about 12 years. We got 12 years. I mean, we got 12 years to what? We got 12 years to make a radical new choice is how I look at it. And then, you know, Indigenous elders, one in particular that I really look to and trust because of their track record of being able to see and know, you know, they said that we had 10 years, and that was 3 years ago. So 7 years by their count, you know, so basically we got a fairly short time frame, you know. And yet I want to propose this. So, you know, when I first said, okay, I'm willing to learn about a new kind of cause and effect, the first thing that they laid on me when I said yes was, so if all times are happening at the same time, what is possible? And so they've been working with me around working with time a lot. And they keep telling me over and over and over again, time is not what you think it is. You know, yes, we're talking about several 100,000 years of human presence trying to work this stuff out. You know, our science doesn't acknowledge that time frame, but Indigenous cultures do, and the holy people are talking about it to me, and they're saying, so that sounds like a long time. You know, when they start getting that big, I'm like, well, geez, I'm completely insignificant. I'm just a drop in the bucket. What does what I have to say or do, you know, how can that affect anything? And they're like, it affects everything. So from where you sit in a material body, in a material world, time is one thing, but time is also something else. So we could say in that sense, we could say there are multiple timelines running, and what they mean and how they work are very different. And so I encourage us to think, to add that into our mix and add that into our inquiry. You know, how can I work with time? Because right now we're saying we got 10 years. That's not a lot of time. But maybe there's another way to work with time. And so one of the ways that I'm working with time, and this is, again, not my brilliant idea, this is Spirit saying, you want to help? Here's a possibility. And I say, okay, yeah, I'm in. And that is that I'm addressing different points in human lineage to do healing work. And some of you know about that part of my work. I've worked with how the witch hunts, which they called was an archetypal wounding of humanity, affected us. But this next piece, so in a month, we're reconvening many of the women, Indigenous women that we gathered from around the world, to go now to South. We went to Europe at that time, and now we're going to go to South Africa to begin to, they say there's a possibility for us to do prayer together and to do ceremony, and it has to do with bringing our lineage to that place and acknowledge origin. So acknowledge when humanity was, so if we go with this, you know, all different cultures have their understanding of the beginning. And so by saying this, I'm not negating those. So here again, multiple realities. But you know, if we look at this star seeding principle, so if we were seeded from the stars, the Mother Earth had to receive us. The Mother Earth had to agree to receive this foreign entity, and she did. And she thought about it, and she said, "Wow. So how do I make these seeds grow in such a way that they will thrive here and that they will be harmonious and help all the rest of the hoop of life thrive?" I mean, because when you think about how many different ways and lives of all the life here, how it's all woven together, to introduce something is a pretty big endeavor, and it takes some thought. And so I believe that, you know, this is kind of how it was shown to me, that she said, all right, I'm going to calibrate these seeds and the way they're going to grow such that they will thrive here. And so by doing that, so there was an agreement that happened of her receiving us. Then there was her calibrating us. So we might say that was our collective original instructions. So I think that's why we're being called to go to South Africa, is because, at least scientifically, it's acknowledged that, or that people like to call it the cradle of humanity. So we're addressing origin, and the nature of our prayer is to re-invoke that moment, and that, you know, as it came to different peoples with original instruction, and to like sort of ring that gong of original instruction again, such that vibration can travel the whole world, and we can all be bathed anew in that moment that happened for us here with this earth. And they tell me that something is going to come of that I can't really even imagine right now, but it's going to address something very profound for us. So that's how I'm, for instance, as I've been saying yes to, okay, teach me about time. They're like, all right, here you go. So that's an example of it.
Wow. And so that is happening in November or December?
November.
Okay.
And
And
actually, I will say that we're in the middle of a fundraising effort for that, to pay for the women to go and for our stay there. Nobody's getting paid for this endeavor. Everybody's giving up their time, just so that we're clear. There's no interference of any kind or motive. And so I guess maybe we can talk about how to connect with that if anybody's interested in contributing.
yes, and I know you have it posted on your Facebook page, right? And I'll also post it. I'll see if I can get it up here in the chat while we're doing the Q&A, the link if anybody wants to make a donation. But definitely I'll post it below the recorded interview. Everybody can access that. Yeah. Well, thank you for all that you have shared here, Pat. It's wonderful to learn and to, to really be immersed in this wisdom that you're here to share. It's really an honor. And yeah, thank you for being a part of this event for sure. And do you have any other upcoming events or anything, projects you're working on that you wanted to share with our audience here?
That's the front burner one for me right now. I will be pretty soon going to make a pretty deep prayer in Israel, between Israel and Palestine. I think in that instance, as I've been feeling into it, and my daughter spoke about it at Bioneers. She was just one of the plenary speakers at Bioneers, which I was so proud of her. My daughter is Lila June Johnston. But she mentioned it in her brief talk, in which she was saying, so hurt people. And she brought up Israel as an example of, having gone through what they went through in their Holocaust in Nazi Germany. And now here they are, and some people might say, replicating it with Palestine. And, it also came up in the human reunion journeys around the masculine, because what I saw, was when I went into visions and like I said at the beginning, and saw the soldiers writing down on us, I couldn't believe the blankness. Like they were just void. And I said to myself, they were like insects. And although I don't know if I can even characterize insects like that, but anyway, that was what came up for me. And then after we did those ceremonies in Europe to address what took place during the witch hunts and how it has played out and is still affecting humanity, I realized that the sacred masculine was so deeply violated because, one, they weren't protecting and providing for the life bringers. They were working against them. But even the men who desperately wanted to save their sisters, their daughters, their mothers, etc., they were not able to. And that changes a man very deeply. If a little boy watches his mother be abused and he can't stop it, because that pact is inside of him that he will protect the sacred, he will protect life, he will protect the life bringer, it really changes him. So as we're finding out, a lot of the sexual assault people were sexually assaulted themselves, right? So we see that there. So what I saw when those soldiers were writing down is those are the grandchildren, sons and grandsons of those men who couldn't protect their women during the witch hunts. So see how it's all connected. That's one great thing that the trickster has in their pocket, is once they get that trauma going, boy, it'll last a long dang time, 3 or 4 generations. So I keep saying, if that's an intentional thing, then I say, I don't want to play. I ain't going to play that game. I ain't going to be a part of that trauma machine. Somehow I'm stepping out. So that's a big intention of mine. But just looking at how hurt people. So I feel like that prayer there is going to be about addressing how do we interrupt that cycle in which it can play out even on that scale, like between Israel and Palestine. And I'm not picking on Israel. You can go anywhere and look.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for sharing about these things that you're currently engaged in. And I did just find the link to donate to Human Reunion to South Africa, which Pat was just speaking about. So that is in the chat here, and I will also post that below the recording for those who are watching this later on.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, well, let's open up the Q&A now. And so anyone who would like to ask Pat a question, go ahead and raise your hand. we can bring you over. And also, if you prefer to put your question in the Q&A or the chat, that is fine. And I will take a look at these that are in the Q&A so far. Oh, well, here's a good question. This is a very simple question, but so Susan asked, and I'm sure, certainly this is why you were saying that one of the most important things we can begin with is to go out and place tobacco on the ground and welcome the sun at sunrise. And she said, why tobacco?
Well, good question. So tobacco, there are different plants. And again, this has to do with that indigenous relationship. So depending on where you are, you're going to have different plants step forward. But here in my part of the world, Southwest United States, or here in the United States, what is now called the United States, tobacco is acknowledged by many of us as being a plant that volunteered to help humanity. So from my perspective, the way I understand it, human beings were the last to arrive here. And so we're like the babies of the family. And everything around us is doing its best to mentor us and parent us, grandparent us into right relations, into this harmonious circle. And so some are a little more active with us than others. And so tobacco literally stepped forward and said, I will help human beings understand how to approach the sacred, how to acknowledge the sacred, how to participate in the sacred. And so what I've been telling people is so that tobacco is a spiritual currency that the spiritual world recognizes, because they know that tobacco has volunteered to do that. So when we come forward with tobacco, like everything kind of sits up and takes notice, you might say, and recognizes, oh, here's relative tobacco working with those five-fingered, toddlers, and they're going to say something, they're going to do something. Let's all check it out, And so it's a signal that is recognized by spiritual help. And so I also say that, so when we approach something, like even if I go someplace new, I always want to go see where the water is, and I want to go lay down tobacco there and acknowledge that water, because that water is going to keep me alive while I'm there. And so there, in a way, we could say that I am being gifted, or I'm partaking of the life force of the indigenous beings that are in any particular area. And now I'm coming to take some of that for myself. So that's a place where I want to acknowledge what is happening and how sacred that is. So I'll go and lay down tobacco. And so what I've been telling people is that when we approach things with tobacco, we are showing a deep respect. And if we can manage to muster some reverence along with it, and approach things like that, even approach our food, even approach, our conscious day, which for me starts in the morning, then all that's out there, recognizes what I'm doing and the spirit in which I'm doing it, the intention in which I'm doing it. And so I say, doors open, doors that were not there open for us. And so it's a really good practice for me to get into, because living in this world with just intellect, just material science and reductionist thought process is pretty freaking depressing. And for some reason, that has been a big part of our education system. But when I approach things with tobacco, then suddenly the mystery of this life begins to open. We could say the magic begins to open. And suddenly I'm in this wonderland. And that's how I like to go about it. So the other thing I'll say about tobacco is we say it also gives you right speech. So if you like how I'm talking, I'm deeply under the influence of tobacco for having gone outside this morning and held that tobacco and stated my intention. So that's a part of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that answer. We have a few more good questions here. So Janie is asking, is it possible to physically join the gathering in South Africa? And she says, with great love and appreciation to Pat. If people are interested in taking part there, is that possible, or is it specific to the group that's
yeah, so I know that what we had thought about doing is meeting together initially pretty close to Johannesburg. Then we are going to go deep into the rural rough. We're going to go rough it for a little while. Then we're going to come back to the Johannesburg area. And at that point, we were talking about opening things up. So maybe you could leave me a message on my website, which is patmccabe.net, if you have an interest like that, and I can let you know how things are developing. It's all kind of coming together. It's kind of hard to describe this process, but it's not the usual process. And I always worry that people will think that I'm not taking it seriously because I don't know the answers, but it's not that. It's just a very different process. So I'm open to that, and it's a possibility. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Let's see. So Jocelyn in South Africa is asking, most of us are so out of touch with our original rituals from our ancestors. Do you have any suggestions as to how to get back in touch with rituals which are meaningful to us based on our own origins? That's kind of a big question.
Well, yes. And so one, well, so again, we come back to the offering of tobacco. Or, you might know in your area what was the traditional offering. Maybe it wasn't tobacco. I know as I've been working with all my beautiful relatives at Schumacher College and in Devon and in Totnes in the UK area, I know the last time I came out there, because I was saying, well, I don't know what the traditional offering here was, but we all went down to go make an offering at the river, and I was all ready to pull out my tobacco, and someone said, here, Pat, over here we offer oats. And I know that was all as a part of our process, and so I loved how they were claiming it. I love that I sort of got a little bit corrected about what's appropriate because they're claiming it, and I was like, right on. So I offered oats, so like that. But to me, even those who come from and who are knowledgeable within a very deep, specific culture and understanding of ceremony, ritual, etc., pretty much it always is going to come down to making the offering and inquiring and listening. Like, that's the basic of it all, no matter how elaborate it is and how much you know about how elaborate it is. That's sort of where the rubber meets the road every single time, no matter what culture you're in, right? And so to go out and that's your signal to the spiritual help that you were sent here with, or your lineage even. And that's the signal, is when you go out, and because we are in a free will construct, so you're consenting to be informed about how to be here from that which serves life, light, and love. And so I just go back to that every single time. Like, that's the beginning. If you do that on a regular basis and listen, if you're not seeing it, sometimes you can say, and please show me in a way that my conscious mind can perceive and understand. Because I want to start knowing, I want to start engaging, I want to start moving in alignment and harmony with this larger community. So when you offer yourself up like that, there's so much that is so waiting for us to say that. I don't think it'll be a problem at all that you're going to get met.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, so again, this is kind of last call for anybody who wants to raise their hand. And we do, oh, Jill has her hand raised. Great. Jill, let me bring you over. But still, last call for anybody else that might want to raise your hand. Hi, Jill. Can you unmute yourself, Jill? It's not letting me unmute you.
Hi.
Okay, great. Hi, welcome. We can only see the very top of your head. There we go. Now we can see you.
Hi. I wanted to ask about wailing, and I say it in reference to something that Larion Makuliev said in one of your other talks, Jocelyn, from a while ago. And he was talking about, and I know it'll be a different Indigenous community, but so he was saying that things are not going to change until the women start moving the negative energy, and like in the moon time, and like wailing and that kind of stuff. And the reason I'm particularly interested is that it's something that's been happening on my like healing trauma journey, where I've started like wailing, crying, making noise that I can't make otherwise, and like having a kind of a voice kind of come to me. But I feel like I want to know more, but I don't know anyone or anywhere. He mentioned like powwow communities, but I can't find any. So do you know anything about that? And then the other thing I just wanted to say was, it really touched me when you were talking about people giving up the paradigm that they have, because I do feel very much about that. Like it came to me that, and it sounds simple, but it felt really powerful, that I am dependent on the earth and on all beings, and that if I'm not following that path, then I am perpetuating harm to myself, and so it affects my physical condition and my epilepsy. So so it made me think, when I'm in the capitalist system, give up my, I feel like I want to give up my house. I want to give up and live in community. But that's the other thing. I'm aware, sorry, I'm saying several things, aren't I? I'm aware that I don't really know of Indigenous peoples. And so the only community that I know is other people that like me, and I'm just aware that their attitude to, they were talking about chopping down the odd tree to make things, and I noticed that they didn't have the respect, the honor that one of your previous speakers mentioned, Jocelyn, the woman about buffalo. She was talking about respect for trees and not just chopping, even in a sustainable community. So my three things: whaling, I was just wanting to say, I'm aware that my fear is keeping me here in my nice house with my mortgage, which is in the capitalist system, blah, 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 blah. And I need to let go of that. And even if I move to community, I want to link with Indigenous, but does that exist?
Well, let's see. So let's start with whaling. So I've also heard it said that, like, for instance, when somebody leaves this material world, their body dies, and they go on, that really they can't make it all the way across to the spirit world if we don't wail for them. So that was one of the first things I thought of when you were talking about that. This one elder was talking to us about that, and so here we are, all plugged up, even at funerals, and trying not to, cause a fuss. And yet we know in other countries there are even professional wailers that people invite to the weddings to really get it rolling. So I find that really interesting. So there are women who, like, that's their forte, and they're actually called upon to really get it going. And I would say that's true of me. I cry all the time when I'm talking. I'm pretty humbled by this whole life experience of late. And so I know that when I cry, others can cry, and others do cry. It creates, we drop down into our hearts when somebody can cry. So one thing you can know is that if you feel like crying, you're probably doing everybody in the room a favor by crying, by letting that out. Even maybe not a full-blown wail while somebody's trying to talk, but to express that. Like, I was with this group of young people. They were age 18 to 28, and they were an international student group. And so I was supposed to speak with them for 3 days, but I went in to go hear the lady who was talking to them before I was, so that I could kind of see how I could be a continuum. And she was a scientist telling them all about all the data coming in about climate change. And she was just going and going and going. And it was so devastating listening to what she was saying. And it was just one thing after another. It was just like getting blow after blow. And so I was looking at all these young people and the tears welling up in their eyes. And it's like she just didn't even pause or anything to just acknowledge all the emotional content that was coming up. Like, she never paused. She just went for like 2 hours straight, just one thing after another. And for a minute there, and I wish I kind of had now, But I thought, should I just go downstairs and sit outside the window and just howl while she's talking, just to sort of model something here, because because it was like this unspoken agreement that nobody was going to show anything about what was happening for them. It was really crazy. So from a traditional perspective, those are some things that I know. But I just want to say that even from a modern psychology perspective, if indeed we are a traumatized species, what I know about my PTSD is what starts to relieve it is the times when I can go ahead and let that cry happen. And I do it alone a lot, or my poor dogs are always like around, poor things. They're like, what the heck now? But anyway, I'm starting to really get that I have to really sob on a fairly regular basis to keep myself from going into PTSD. That's so helpful for me. So that's a part of the process of releasing trauma. And that, again, you know, we think it's going to kill us. Every time it feels like it's going to kill me. Every single time. And every single time it doesn't. But what's interesting about it is until I release that, I'm locked in a certain way of looking at things even. But once I do release it, again, there's that spectrum of possibility opens up for me again. So that's another practice. There are these grief composting circles that I think actually come out of Joanna Macy's work. And I happen to know a woman in the UK, Azul, and I can't remember what her last name is, Valerie Azul, or it's Azul Valerie. Anyway, you can look her up on Facebook, Azul. And she's doing lots of different things in her community. And I don't know how many of them are being replicated or not, but she's all about, man, we got to get down and grieve. So maybe I'll just answer that part of your question for now. And I appreciate your exploration of trying to find other paradigm. I will say one thing about the mortgage. Recently in a sweat lodge, the spirit just said to me, is that really good use of your resources to be paying a mortgage in which, I don't know, what is it, like 70% of every payment at first is like all interest? They're like, does that really make sense? And I haven't really known what to do with it yet, but they were kind of poking me about it. They were like, you know, you're usually a pretty smart girl, but what the heck's going on here, you know? So anyway.
All right. Thank you, Jill, for your questions. Hope you have a wonderful day. Okay. So Pat, we're at 33 minutes past the hour. Do you have time for one more question? And you can say no if you want.
No, I do. I do.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Deborah, let me bring you over. I'll have one more question for today here. Okay, there we go. Hi, Deborah. Welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, Pat. Hi, Jocelyn. Thank you so much for this today. It's my great pleasure to be able to connect with you, Pat. Woman Stand Shining. I don't feel that I have a carved out question per se. There's so much that this talk has brought up in me today, regards to healing and in regards to consent. It's brought up an experience from my past when I was 15, very similar to Dr. Ford's actually. And how our memories are so clear and sharp and vivid with regard to specific parts of a situation, and then a little foggy around the minutia, the details that are more irrelevant. I'm very intrigued by your journey to South Africa coming up. My daughter married a man who is originally from Johannesburg, and they go to South Africa visiting, but also they work with Indigenous people whenever they do visit South Africa. And they've had some beautiful beautiful memories and of their experiences to share with me. And I think I just really want to express that for many, many years, the Indigenous teachings have been a very strong part of my own personal journey and my own personal journey toward healing. It is the only teachings that resonate with me. It's not about church for me. It's not about, religion. It is the pivotal experiences I've had in sacred ceremony, fire dances, eagle dances, sacred sweat lodges that have just opened me up in so many ways. And I just want to deeply, thank you and honor you for allowing me, as a Caucasian woman, to be a part of that. And I've always been welcomed and continue to be so. And I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Gosh, that makes my heart feel so good to hear you say that you've always been welcomed. The old people that were around, they're kind of, most of them have left this world now. They were really open. They held an old principle in which it was said, I think, that all this medicine was given freely from the spirit world to the human world. And so, and this is my issue with capitalism as well, is that withholding principle that is inherent. You can't have this unless you do this or pay this or, And so here's this Mother Earth with all of her heart generously giving us all the water we need, all the fruits, all the plants. And then there's a human being standing in between her and me saying, I'm not going to let the generosity, love, care, fruits of the Mother Earth flow to you unless you do something for me. And to me, that is a hugely deep violation of the principle and the law of this place. And so in a very similar way, the old principle was that medicine, my question, if I'm a conduit for medicine, is to say, who am I to get in the way of the spiritual help that someone else is, that spirit wants to give to someone else. That's not for me to really do. I do want to, I am often tempted to protect it and to safeguard it and to guide it and to et cetera. And that's where things can get tricky. But I have to keep in mind the big principle is I can't be that gatekeeper of the medicine just because I've been hurt, just because I have resentment, just because I have anger, as retaliation, as revenge, as withholding, because that begins to get me in that place of violating that principle. So yeah, it just makes me feel very happy to hear you say that. And that was modeled to me by many elders that were around me in my early days on this road. I've only been on this road 25 years, and they say that makes me a baby in these ways. So I have a lot more to learn, but that's what I see so far.
I feel that I understand what you're saying. There's so many, groups of people that get together and, say that they're on the Indigenous path, but there's so much, it's commercialized. It's, it's commercialized. And I feel very grateful to have been a part of the community and welcomed into these, free teachings, and we honor and give a gift of, whatever that may be. Maybe it is merely, you know, it's tobacco. It needn't be any more than that. And these teachings have been, I mean, it was via an amazing storyteller, woman, Esther O'Shea, a dear friend she has become, from the Anishinaabe up here in Ontario. I live in Toronto, on Manitoulin Island. So that is where, you know, I was welcomed by her and her community in the Whitefish River First Nations. I'm just, as she's still a part of, you know, still a part of my life, and I don't participate as you know, as much in ceremony and stuff, and going up north to Manitoulin Island as much as I did, you know, so many years ago for a long period of time. But we're sisters, and will always be deeply connected. And whenever I do have the opportunity to meet with her, I mean, we talked about, she initially, when I first met her too, would talk about those teachings as being sacred, and to, you know, for her and the rest of her community wanted to protect those, to keep them safe and not share them with just anyone. You know, I think they would use their discernment as to who they would share with and in what form. So I just feel very, very grateful and honored.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Deborah. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thanks. Okay. Well, thank you again, Pat, so much for being here with us, sharing all of this. It's truly an honor.
Yeah, truly an honor for me to have this opportunity to give voice to the directions that Spirit is leading me, and I pray that it will serve the very highest possibility for life, light, and love for each and every one of us, and may open something that needed to be opened, and maybe put to rest something that needed to be put to rest for us, so that we can truly move forward in our full life's purpose, and in whatever that part of our authority that we are to bring, the authority to speak on behalf of life.
Wonderful. Aho.
Oh.
Thank you, Pat. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm sure we'll be in touch sometime soon. And many blessings on your upcoming travels.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.